It's fine. I won't be offended, and Mike's filming it, so we can either make the people who have to leave early DVDs or just email it to you.
Would you like
kick that voice up a little bit more.
Use the microphone?
If you use the microphone, I won't have to ask him to kick his voice up a little bit.
You want to use it?
Yeah, all right.
Let's keep this part far away from you. Far away from you. Yeah, this part. Unplug you for a second.
When you have a bassier voice, David, it doesn't carry as far. You know, the higher tones pierce. So I mean,
what are you talking about?
Talking your little boy voice. Do you remember that one?
What?
Do you remember your little boy voice?
I did a little boy voice?
Yeah, he said you need to talk higher so he can hear me.
No, he was just talking about.
he's more monotone. That's.
Oh.
You have to do the presented as Christopher Walken.
Hello?
Yeah.
Is that going to be fine, or?
Yeah, that's good. That's
All right. Right, so like I said, if anyone needs to leave early, I won't be offended. This will be between 2 and 3 hours. And just a disclaimer, I have a bad cough, so if I sound like a veteran smoker, I apologize for that. So anyway, the focus of this presentation, I don't know why that's messed up there, is going to be deciphering Genesis chapter 49, where Jacob gives specific prophecies to each one of his 12 sons in the last days. So we're going to dive into that to find out just exactly. Oh, I got yeah.
I can change the slides for you if you need me to do that. Just say next.
Okay, yeah, I think that's better. Thanks. Right, so since this is being filmed for people that are relatively new at this, I'm just going to give a couple minutes of elementary stuff you already know. I apologize for that. Genesis 17, 20 through 21, this is where Yahweh blesses Ishmael, who is Abraham's, the son of Hagar and Abraham, and he doesn't inherit, but he still gets a blessing. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if we accept the premise that all of the tribes are Jewish, we have a problem right off the bat, because Ishmael has the lesser blessing, yet his descendants are over 100 million people today. But there's only 15 million Jews in the entire world. So if Isaac gets the covenant and Ishmael gets the lesser blessing, then why does Ishmael outnumber Isaac? We got a big problem right here already. Next. And here's the second problem with believing the traditional theory that all the tribes are Jewish. We're going to go through 5 verses real quick. Genesis 15:5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look not toward heaven and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. Next. As many as the stars. Keep that in mind. Genesis 22:17. Then in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. Okay, so what do we got so far? Abraham's seed through Isaac will be as many as the stars in the sky, sand in the sea. Next. Genesis 26:4. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and I will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Next. Genesis 28:14. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and then thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Next. And finally, Hosea 1:10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living out.
Hallelujah.
Next.
Can you just, it's okay, you can drop your tone a little bit because you got the microphone, so.
Okay. Alright, so what do we see here? Isaac has to be greater than Ishmael, and he's as many as the stars in the sky, the dust in the ground, sand in the sea. Sand in the sea. He needs to be a big number. So 15 million Jews, if it's only the Jews, compared to 7 billion people, just doesn't match up. I think even a kindergartner could catch this logical fallacy. And then there's hundreds of prophecies relating to how the nations will be scattered. I'll just give one, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of things to prove that they were scattered. This is basically Jim Staley's identity crisis, but on steroids. This gets to the heart of the matter. Stuff he didn't want to talk about, I guess. In Amos 9:9 it says, For lo, I will command, and I will sift the house of Israel among all nations, like as corn is sifted in a sieve, yet shall not the least grain fall upon the earth. Next. We'll get to this in a minute. But notice what the prophet Amos said is that not the least grain shall be sifted. We'll be able to track them all. So, people that attack the two-house theology, they say, well, all the tribes, we're lost, we can't find them. Well, it's not true. We're going to show you how we find them. Then they say, well, they must all be dead. Well, didn't Amos just said that not one grain of them shall be sifted? And then the other objection is, well, You know, nobody can lose their identity after, you know, people have to know who they are. Well, to give one example, you know, Boaz Michael of First Fruits of Zion, his great-grandmother was Jewish, and he forgot who he was due to interfaith marriage. So if he could forget after 2 or 3 generations, why couldn't anyone else forget? And then finally, the other problem, if you accept the traditional theory that all the tribes are Jewish, is that the word Jew is not mentioned in the whole Bible until 1 Kings 16:6. It comes from the Hebrew word Yehuda, which means the tribe of Judah. The word Jew is not mentioned in all that. So the Jews are only one tribe. You
Amen.
can look in, huh?
Amen.
Amen. Amen. So you can look at a Strong's Concordance and disprove that. And so this is where we're going to dive into this. So just a quick disclaimer. This is a little long because there's a couple thousand pages of data to be covered. And so because of this, and for another reason I'm getting to, I ask that anyone please not ask any questions until it's over so you can see a big picture, and please be open-minded. Now another disclaimer is that there are some clowns that's abusing some of this truth to spread hate and division of people. Now some of these people, they're called, you know, Christian identity or whatnot, these neo-Nazi white supremacists. But see, we have another problem here. Because if these guys say they're the Israelites, well, why aren't they following Torah? Why are they still Christians? And why do they idolize Hitler, who was a pagan, not a Christian or any Judeo-Christian religion, and he was not even an Aryan or Anglo-Saxon. He was descended from the Assyrians, which we'll cover a little bit later on. So the word to those people is that, oh, I got a question for them. Do you all have a case of the terminal stupids? So you're not going to hold on to this information that was hundreds of years before you distorted it. We're going to take it back because there's some truth to it.
Let's take it back.
So anyway, the whole purpose of this is to decipher Genesis 49, these end-time prophecies. But before we get to that, I need to explain a little biblical history. Now, this area right here is what secular historians call the Phoenician Empire, also known as the Fertile Crescent. Now, there's already a problem right here because Phoenicia is not an accurate term. And you'll see this as a running theme throughout this presentation, is that the Greeks and the Romans wrote most of history. And a lot of linguistics and stuff has been lost, which kind of requires some detective work, and also finding some alternate or lesser-known historians. The term Phoenicia was actually invented by Homer. Next slide. Not that Homer, next one. The term Phoenicia was invented by Homer, the Greek poet / author. It's from the Greek word phoenique, which is the Greek equivalent to the word Canaan. So the Greek historians, and then the Romans later took Phoenique and changed it to Phoenicia. So, you know, the Romans conquered the Greeks eventually. This was to refer to this whole empire. And actually, the Phoenicians just started off as the people of Tyre and Sidon. Next slide. So this is what we're going to trace. Now, eventually, the kingdom of King David united both the kingdoms of Israel and Judah into one kingdom. And we're going to see through David and Solomon that he had an alliance with these so-called Phoenicians. We'll just call them Phoenicians for the sake of simplicity. But see, the Tyre and Sidon, their land wasn't very well developed, and so they had to import food from other people. And the people that provided the food was Israel. And you read this in Ezekiel 27:17. So there's a relationship between Phoenicia and Israel. Israel gives them their food, and Phoenicia does something else for them. And we're going to get to that. Now, the Phoenicians, or the Tyrians and the Sidonians, were Semitic people just like the Israelites. You see this in 1 Kings 17, verses 9 through 16. When Elijah stayed with the Sidonian widow in the Sidonian suburb of Zarephath, they had no trouble communicating. They already understood each other. The Phoenicians and the Israelites, they shared a common heritage. They're both Semitic, a common language. Even their alphabets were similar, which we'll get to in a bit. And they also shared a common enemy, the Philistines. So this is all the more reason to form an alliance, plus the Phoenicians need food and the Israelites will benefit from them later. Now how this all started, you'll find that the alliance was formed when King David and Hiram, the king of Tyre at the time, formed a close personal relationship. You'll find this in three places: 2 Samuel 5:11, 2 Samuel 7:1 through 3, and 1 Kings 5:1, where the king of Tyre, I guess he was really hungry or something, just went to David and started giving him gifts and formed a friendship, and then just catapulted from there. Now David, as we all know, is a warlike monarch, and he expanded Israel's borders and influence by conquering the kingdoms of the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, and the Syrians. Now some historical sources, most English Bibles call the Syrians, but the more proper term is actually Aramaic. Because you know the language Aramaic, which you see present in actually the book of Daniel. Some other books were partially written in Aramaic. And some Jewish prayers, such as on Yom Kippur, are in Aramaic. It is a Semitic language that used a similar alphabet. Next. And we're going to see how the Arameans and the Israelites were close kinsmen too. Now, Mesopotamia this term is interchangeable with Assyria. It doesn't matter which term you use. The Bible uses both. So this map here, the green area, this was the kingdom of Assyria. Now keep this map in mind as we're going to go back to it a couple times. So go to the next slide. Now, David commanded an army at one point of 1,570,000 soldiers, not counting the tribes of Levi and Benjamin. You'll see this in 1 Chronicles 21, verses 1 through 6. Now, in 1 Chronicles chapter 19, we see that the Ammonites provoked a war with King David, and they hired a very large number of soldiers from the Mesopotamian nations, as well as Syria, to fight David's army. And these mercenaries they hired, the combined fighting force was 32,000 chariots. So you can guess how many men are in there. Now this is confusing at first, because in 1 Chronicles 18:11, we see that the Ammonites, because David conquered them and made them his servants, they were paying a tribute to him. So they couldn't afford to hire these 32,000 chariots and mercenaries. So what actually happened when you read this whole chapter is that the Assyrian Empire, or the Mesopotamians, actually gave the Ammonites money so that the Ammonites could hire the mercenaries for them, as well as hire the Syrians. They didn't want to openly declare war on David, so they used these other guys. But David found out eventually. And so this whole 1 Chronicles chapter 19, it chronicles this very bloody battle. Now, just the Syrians, or the Arameans alone, in this battle, they lost as much people as the United States lost during the entire war of Vietnam. Give you an idea.
In one day.
Yes, in one day. So, next slide, please. Now, actually, secular historical sources, and we're going to use a few of them, they all back up the scriptures. And so, secular historical sources tell us Now, during the time all of this was going on, the Assyrian king was named Tiglath-Pileser I. Now, when he died, his successors, these guys, Ashur-Rabbi II and Tiglath-Pileser II, it just all went downhill from there. Now, the Arameans, the secular history books call them the Arameans, not the Syrians. The Arameans actually drove away the Assyrians. Now, at first this doesn't make sense because after that battle in 1 Chronicles 19, David made the Syrians his servants. So, how is it they're fighting the Assyrians when the Syrians were fighting with the Assyrians against David to begin with? Well, after David hired them as his servants, since they were his servants, he used them to drive the rest of the Assyrians away. Then I go to the next slide. Now, I forget which slide it is, but we'll come back to it. Is that that map of Mesopotamia you saw? That was all the Assyrian Empire. But David, when he made the Syrians his servants, the Syrians drove away the Assyrians, and then the Phoenicians actually got all that land. And when you look up in history books the map of the Phoenician Empire or the Assyrian Mesopotamian Empire, they're the exact same land. But as you know, they're all Greek and Roman terms, so they don't identify these people correctly. And this is what we'll find out. Now, the Israelites and the Arameans, they've always been pretty close. Isaac married an Aramean girl named Rebekah. And in Deuteronomy 26, 1 through 5, we see an Israelite making an offering, and he said that a Syrian or an Aramean was his father. And prior to this battle with the Syrians and the Ammonites, King Tow of Aramea actually was an ally of David's. So they're all Semitic people, and they're actually, just like the Phoenicians, they actually are practically kinsmen. Because when I say Semitic people, like when people say anti-Semite, first thing you think of is anti-Jewish, but a Semitic person is anyone who comes from Noah's son Shem. Even some pagans like the Assyrians and the Philistines are Semites too. So that's what I mean when I say Semite. So then you go to the next slide, please. You're done adjusting that. Okay, so what is it that Israel wanted to use the Phoenicians for? We're about to find this out. David was not allowed to build Yahweh's temple because he had too much blood on his hands. We see this in 2 Samuel 7, verses 1 through 13, and 1 Chronicles 22, verse 8. However, even though he wasn't allowed to build the temple, he continued to stockpile materials for the temple up until his son Solomon took the throne. And the question is, who's getting the materials and where are they coming from? Because, what's that?
I said, you guys say? Was it?
Well,
I'm sorry.
we'll see if you're right. We'll see if you're right. Now, because while David was stockpiling these materials, Tyre and Sidon, or Phoenicia, built David's palace for him as a gift. And evidently, all of these... Something happened.
Do you have the right?
Oh,
You need to plug it in.
No, it's not. It's
Telephone.
there. Cool. We're good.
Alright, so go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now we're back to this map. Now, if you remember the old map I showed you of Mesopotamia, it's the exact same land. So what's going on here? Well, the Israelites and the Phoenicians, when they teamed up, they took all the Assyrians' land. And the green area, this was the area that Solomon controlled. You see this in 1 Kings chapter 4. So I'll go to the next slide, please. Now, so we're getting to why the Israelites needed an alliance with the Phoenicians. Now, in 1 Kings 5:1, shortly after Solomon took the throne, Hiram, the king of Tyre that was close with David, he sent ambassadors to Solomon to ensure that there was a continued good relationship with Israel's new king. And so then in the same chapter, we see that Tyre and Sidon, or Phoenicia, is working with Israel to construct the temple. Because remember, Yahweh said David can't build it because he has too much blood on his hands. But his son Solomon is going to build the temple. So then, in 1 Chronicles 8:2, King Hiram gives a number of Phoenician cities to King Solomon. Then Solomon settles Israelites in these cities. So these people are getting intermingled. And you're going to see this come to fruition later. So, you saw that green area. That included some of Egypt. Well, that was because Solomon's first wife was a daughter of Egypt's Pharaoh. And so, Pharaoh sent an army to conquer a city and present it to Solomon as a gift. Probably as a dowry to his daughter. So, what we're seeing here, that the mainstream history books don't talk about anymore, they used to. A lot of the information I am getting here is, well, it's actually from several books, but those books get it from old editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica and older historians, because the modern history books, they just conveniently, after the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, they start cutting this stuff out. Probably because when the prophet Darwin came along, nobody can, verify that the Bible, that the events in the Bible are real, because that's heresy. So to go to the next slide, please. So, this is what Israel needed the Phoenicians for. In 2 Chronicles 8, verse 18, the Phoenicians had long-range ocean travel skills. They were seafarers, and they shared with the Israelites, under the reign of David, their secrets of long-range ocean travel. And then we also see that the navies of all the nations, Phoenicians and Israelites, were commingled. This was basically a super empire, Israel, Phoenicia, and Egypt. And we see in 2 Chronicles 9:13, these ships brought 666 talents of gold to Solomon in 1 year. Now, depending on what scale you use, a talent is roughly 75 pounds. So each year, assuming this is the same amount every year, Solomon got about $316 million in modern USD just from these ships coming in. And then 1 Kings chapters 9 and 10, we see that the Phoenicians and the Israelites operate a combined allied fleet. And they went to international destinations all over the world. So you see, Israel knew that the Phoenicians had long-range ocean travel skills, something they didn't have. So David and Solomon needed them to get materials from elsewhere to help them build the temple. And they also built David's palace, Solomon's palace, a separate palace for his first Egyptian wife, among other things. So this was their symbiotic relationship. So if you go to the next slide, please. Now, these are two pictures of a Phoenician ship. These were called hippo ships. Now, they weighed over 1,000 tons and could carry over 500 tons of cargo. Just one ship. They had tons of them. Now, by comparison, the Mayflower ship weighed only 180 tons by comparison. So compared to this big guy, the Mayflower is a little midget. But of course, everyone brags about the Mayflower. Oh, it was a revolutionary invention. This was the biggest ship ever made at the time. No, these ships, about 1,000 years or so before that, were even bigger. So if you go to the next slide, please. Now, what were the Phoenicians were going somewhere on these ships. and excavated all these materials for the temple, you know, copper, gold, iron, whatever's needed for these buildings. And so this is a blast furnace. Now I have no pictures of the inside of the blast furnace, but this is, it was all ruined on the inside when an archaeologist discovered this. And this is a, it's hard to see, but this is an artist's recreation of how the blast furnace worked. So we can see that the Phoenicians went somewhere and got precious metals and then smelted them in this furnace, which is in Ezion-Geber. That's somewhere in Israel. It's now called, I think, Halaf, or no, it's Eloth, something like that. So if you go to the next slide, please.
That was near the ocean though, right?
I believe it was, I don't remember.
So they could unload the ore.
Okay, so where were the Phoenicians getting all of these precious metals? Because, okay, think about it. In 1 year, there was, you know, several thousand tons of gold, copper, ore, whatnot coming into Israel. And it couldn't have been from the Middle East because there was not that many mines there. So they had to go elsewhere. And it tells you in 2nd Chronicles that the Phoenicians and the Israelites had a combined navy and they sailed around the world. So where were some of the places that they went to get these precious metals? Here's one of them, Lake Superior in Michigan. Now before you think I'm going to some kook stuff, like I said, you got to watch till the end. Around the northern shore of Lake Superior and on the adjacent Isle Royale, there are approximately 5,000 ancient copper mines. In 1953 and 1956, Professor Roy Dreyer led 2 Michigan mining and technology expeditions to this site, to these mines. They carbon dated the charcoal at the bases of the mining pits. And it was determined that the mines had been operated between 2000 and 1000 BC. And they discovered that at least 500 million tons of metallic copper were removed during that time span, just from these mines in Michigan. Now, this time frame of between 2000 and 1000 BC, this was the time span that David and Solomon ruled. Okay, so they're getting, from this mine alone, 500 million tons of metallic copper. Now, what was the only nation at the time that had ships that advanced? Each ship could carry 500 tons of cargo, and then they're bringing back all this gold to Solomon. The Phoenicians were here, getting those precious metals for the temple, the palaces, and other things. Now, if you go to the next slide, please. Now, this is what we call the Los Lunas stone. This is a Decalogue stone. This is an ancient 10 Commandments in Paleo-Hebrew, and it actually has the Father's name in Paleo-Hebrew, Yahweh, or however you pronounce it. Now, this was found on the border of Hidden Mountain in Los Lunas, New Mexico, 35 miles south of Albuquerque. And I'm going to show you several artifacts in Paleo-Hebrew and other Semitic languages that prove that people from Israel, Phoenicia, and other people from the Middle East were in North America getting these precious metals for the building of the temple and other Israelite structures.
Unfortunately, that first line up there has been defaced.
What, you mean this?
Yeah, the first line has been defaced. We
Defaced?
were there about, what, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
3 years ago?
Yeah, people.
Mario and I were there, and the top line's been defaced.
Yeah, because you can view that in New Mexico. I think you pay like $30 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't pay anything.
No.
Well, there's I wasn't going to mention it was defaced, but it was, and
Yeah.
there's a reason why. Now, when I show these artifacts, now, of course, because this is threatening to the status quo that Christopher Columbus was the first person to come to America, you know, the mainstream archaeologists, you know, most of them probably secular atheists, these college-educated people, they don't want to acknowledge that there's proof of the Bible or the people from it, nor the events. And you're going to see this pattern. Every time we see artifacts like this found, they're going to say, oh, it's a hoax. Well, a court of law in 1987 in Albuquerque determined this artifact to be authentic. There's nothing fake about it. And what was sad is that the people that were offended by this produced fake Greek artifacts. They made these fake artifacts themselves and presented them in court. And they said, oh, you see, that's Greek. Here's the other artifacts. Well, they found out these artifacts to counter this were a lie. And the people that falsified false evidence to the court were put in jail. So a court of law affirmed this is real. And as you know, Don, you can see this thing in New Mexico to this day.
Yeah.
And the state sponsored it as real. One of their courts found it as real. So you go to the next slide. Now this is the Bat Creek stone. This is found in Loudoun County, Tennessee in 1889. Now, for 90 years, all of the mainstream archaeologists, they said, oh, this thing's real. Because at first they thought this was a Cherokee alphabet, and it's natural to assume that because those were indigenous people of the Americas. However, in the 1970s, linguist Cyrus Gordon proved that it was written in Paleo-Hebrew, not in Cherokee alphabet. And when I say he proved it, he presented a good case, and the naysayers couldn't argue with it. So you guess what they're going to say next? Oh, this thing's fake. Well, for 90 years he said it was real, and all of a sudden, now that it's not in the language you thought was, now it's a fake. I mean, you pretty much guess where this is going. And they'll say, well, the stone is carbon dated to 1000 BC, but the letters were added later. Well, why did it take you 90 years to find out, and only after someone made you look stupid that you said, oh, it's fake? So you go to the next slide, please. Now, Baruch was actually wearing a shirt that had these. I'd like to know where you got that t-shirt. Yeah, you're wearing it right now.
Yay.
These are the Newark Holy Stones, discovered in Newark, Ohio in 1860. These are decalogues, basically the 10 Commandments. And of course, they're a hoax too. Ask any scientist. It's all a hoax. So you go to the next one, please. Now this is, we're going to come back to this later. This was a stele found in Davenport, Iowa. And it's written in 3 ancient languages, and I'll tell you what languages these are later. Now this is a hoax too, so forget you ever saw it. We'll go to the next one. Now this was nicknamed Mystery Hill, also called America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire. Now what this place is, as you know, just from the account of Elijah the prophet, which we'll discuss in this presentation too, is that the Phoenicians were Baal worshippers. Well, Mystery Hill was a shrine dedicated to Baal, and it has Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions in it too. Now, think about it. If they're mining all these hundreds and thousands of tons from a place they don't live in, they have to establish some posts and whatnot. You go to the next slide, please. It's just a closer view. It does kind of look like Stonehenge. And you go to the next slide. Go back, and that's the last one. Now you go to the, now of course this is a hoax too, so forget you ever saw that. As you go to the next one, these are the Adena tablets. Now this is a pagan sun god, and again Paleo-Hebrew Semitic language inscription. A total of 13 of these tablets were found in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia. Now, they acknowledge that one of them is real, because they had no choice to. But the rest are fake. This is the one they claim is real, so it's okay to believe that one's real. So you go to the next one. The scientists say it's okay. If you go to the next one, please. Now, these were, several dozen of these stones were found in Susquehanna Valley in Pennsylvania. Again, some sort of Semitic language, Paleo-Hebrew. Those are fake, so never mind. You go to the, I think this is the last one. Now this is the most curious. This was found on Montague Island off the coast of Maine. Now evidently they had to build forts, places to live. Well, they shipped all these precious metals back to Israel. Now this, when translated, it says something like port or Sidon or Tyre, one of those places I forget. So the coast of Maine is their port where they sent the ships with the goods from. So you go to the next slide. I think that's the last one. All right, we'll get to this in a minute. So, okay, you get the picture. All of these things are fake. Even when a court of law acknowledges it's real, they're all fake. And all the, you know, if you research these on the internet or go look in a history book, they'll all say they're fake. Now, these are the same scientific masterminds, these same astute geniuses that think we all came from crap-flinging apes and that the universe was created with a crackle bomb. These same geniuses that got their PhDs by writing a thesis on Piltdown Man. 500 PhDs were earned by writing an essay on Piltdown Man. Now, Piltdown Man, they found a jawbone of an orangutan. That's all they found, and they said, well, this is the missing link. Then they created Piltdown Man, what our ancient ancestors looked like. Turned out to be a hoax. But there's people to this day who have a doctorate degree from writing about that lie. Now those are still in the scientific textbooks your kids are reading in high school. They don't, even though it was proven to be a hoax, it's still in textbooks. But these things that we are proven to be authentic, all those are hoaxes. But Piltdown Man, I believe in him, and I believe in the Tooth Fairy too. And so, now, these are, I'm going to show you a slide of Phoenician coins. And as you saw from that map, and since they traveled all around the world and exported cargo, these coins have been found practically everywhere, even in North America.
Wow.
So this is a drawing for clarity, because some of these are eroded. Now again, you see this Paleo-Hebrew inscription. Now, the Phoenicians used a similar alphabet, and so did the Aramaeans, and I can guess where they got it from. You know that Solomon was blessed with abundant wisdom, and I think I forgot to include the verse, maybe I mentioned it where, but he studied everything. He studied plants, animals, he kept zoos, he had all this knowledge of here. He asked Yahweh for it, and he gave it to Solomon. So I believe that Solomon, once his father David, allied himself with the Phoenicians, he invented this alphabet, this Paleo-Semitic that the Phoenicians and the Aramaeans and everyone was using at the time. Now the difference between the Phoenician alphabet and the Paleo-Hebrew is that they added the vowels, plus they look a little differently. So what this inscription you'll see more clearly on the other coins is this, without the vowels, it is BRT. Translate it in English the best you can. Now BRT, this is Barit, the covenant people. Now this is what I'm getting at. Secular historians call all of that Phoenicia, but it was the Phoenician, Israelite, and even Egyptian empire. And they all, when you notice Solomon settled Israelites in the Phoenician cities. When Hiram gave them those cities, these people were all intermingled. That's why they used the same alphabet, and they were catching character traits from each other and culture. So these Phoenicians called themselves the covenant people, BRT, Barit. Now that's a drawing. This is the actual coin, but it's kind of corroded. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's more Paleo-Hebrew or some sort of Semitic language similar. That's the Phoenician alphabet. Now, a lot of these coins, some of them are from Phoenicia, some are from Carthage, some are from Parthia. That all these empires have a common ancestor, which you'll find out later. Now, again, on this, this is a coin from Carthage. It has the BRT, the Barit covenant people again. And so these people have some clue of who they are, who they were. So if you go to the next slide, please. These are just various other coins, and you can see that same Phoenician type alphabet. And you go to the next one. Next one. Yeah, and it's just some more, and I think that's the last page. So you go to the next one. Now, the Bible mentions a place first in 1 Kings 10:22 called Tarshish. Now, Tarshish was a port city in ancient Spain. Now, it says Solomon had at sea a navy of Tarshish. Well, why is he sending navies to Spain? Well, this is one of the areas that the Phoenicians had colonies here. Now, keep this theme in mind, because the Romans and Greeks write history. All of these names got mixed up, but we can find clues of their origins, and the Phoenicians and the Israelites were all intermingled. This is important to remember. Now, in ancient Spain, Tarshish was, in secular historical accounts, it's called Tartessus, but sometimes it's identified as Tarshish. Now, Jonah, the prophet Jonah, sailed from Joppa to Tarshish to get away from the direction of Nineveh. So he was trying to come here too. How did he know to come here? Well, that's because all the other Hebrews were doing this for quite some time. Now, the language of these Phoenician colonies in ancient Spain eventually came to be known as Iberian Punic. You're going to see that term Punic a lot. It kind of is just a blanket term for a lot of different places. Now, what's interesting is that Tarshish was the name of a clan from the tribe of Benjamin. And Iberia, because Spain and Portugal, is called the Iberian Peninsula. That term came from Hibernia, the ancient name for Ireland. And that came from Iber, or Heber, which was an ancestor of Abraham. It's where the word Hebrew comes from. Now, this is another thing to point out. My mom actually taught me this. Is that, you know, these neo-Nazis, they always say, well, the Hispanic people, you know, they call them all kinds of derogatory names like mud people, although they aren't white. Oh, do you realize that you all have the same common ancestor? Because Spain and Portugal, they came from Ireland. You see the connection, the Iberian Peninsula and the Iberian Kingdom. They all have a common ancestor. But they say, oh, well, the Irish, they're cool, they're pale skin and have red hair. Well, it's the same ancestor, dummy. And you don't read your history. And then you see, this is what I mean. They cherry pick some of this information, don't realize how dumb they are. Then you go to the next slide, please. And I forgot to mention, this presentation is not to say, oh, who the law applies to or who can be grafted in. As everyone knows, and Mario mentioned, you have Rahab and Ruth, who were in the lineage of Messiah, who were Amorites and Moabites. So they were a different lineage than the Hebrews, but still Semitic people, but they were considered pagan, but they became in the lineage of Messiah. So none of this is to say, oh, this is who the law applies to, or this person's superior or anything like that. This is just to get a grip on prophecy. And so I'll culminate in Genesis 49. So anyway, another settlement in ancient Spain or Iberia was Gades or Gades. I'm not good at pronouncing Spanish. Now some other names for it were Gadir and Gadara. Now that city today is known as Cadiz. The Phoenician word for this ancient port city of Gades, it meant an enclosure or fortified place. And keep in mind the Phoenician language is very similar to the Hebrew language. Now the Hebrew word Gadar also means enclose, fence up, or make a wall. Since the Hebrew word Gadar would have been written without vowels at that ancient time, its consonants GDR would serve precisely as the root word for the names Gadir or Gadaria. The historian George Rawlinson, and George Rawlinson Rawlinson understood a lot of this stuff, and he was a very brilliant historian, but he's not quoted much today, I guess, because stuff like this, you know, it's a threat to secular history, trying to discredit the Bible. Now, George Rawlinson commented that Gades meant house of the Gads. So you go to the next slide, please. Now, Solomon brought together the golden age of Israel. You saw how prosperous they were. He was the first one to build the temple. Unfortunately, as we know, Solomon took a lot of pagan wives that worshipped other gods, and they got him worshiping those gods. And not only did he turn away from Yahweh, but he started to go, his personality started to deteriorate. He started to act even like the older evil King Saul. And the heir of this Aramean prince named Rezon and the Edomites that were his servants became his adversaries. Because of Solomon's wickedness, Yahweh sent a prophet to Solomon, and he said, when you die, the kingdoms will be split. And Jeroboam, who was the governor of the chief tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the prophet told Solomon, Jeroboam will rule the northern kingdom when he died. And Solomon was enraged and tried to kill Jeroboam. So the Pharaoh, that was the father of Solomon's first Egyptian wife, gave Jeroboam sanctuary. So these alliances are starting to crumble. Now, after Solomon died, you can go to the next slide. Now, under David, Judah and Israel were one kingdom. And when Solomon died, they split again. And so, you gotta keep this in mind. Well, I know all of you know this, but some people don't get this. When the Bible, after Solomon's death, mentions Israel and Judah, it's two separate kingdoms. They're not all the same tribes, and the only Jewish tribe is Judah. You can look up in any concordance and it'll tell you that. And so, the northern kingdom were 10 tribes. The other 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom, Judah, was Benjamin and Judah and some of Levi. So you go to the next slide, please. Now Jeroboam, who ruled the northern kingdom, disenfranchised the Levitical priesthood. He got rid of them. And so the tribe of Levi migrated to the kingdom of Judah. And then Rehoboam, who ruled the southern kingdom, after serving Yahweh for 3 years, he abandoned his law. So Jeroboam got rid of the religious services. He went to the southern kingdom, and then the king of the southern kingdom, Rehoboam, just got rid of the Torah, so the Levites really had nothing to do. Now, a later king, I'm kind of summarizing this and jumping, you know, in between. I'm not going to list every king in between. But King Asa of Judah. Now, it says in 2 Chronicles 15:9, well, he's the king of the southern kingdom, Judah. He gathered Judah, Benjamin, as well as Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon, who were there with them. Well, what are they doing in the southern kingdom? Because after the Levites were kicked out by Jeroboam and went to the southern kingdom, some people went with them. They wanted to be where the Levites were. And so then King Asa's son, Jehoshaphat, who succeeded Asa, he commanded an army of over 1 million soldiers, consisting of both the northern and southern tribes. So we can see that after the Levites left, a lot of the tribes from the northern kingdom went into the southern kingdom too. This is what a lot of people don't realize. So you go to the next slide, please. And this is where it all started, the downfall. So the northern kingdom, in 1 Kings 16, the king of the northern kingdom at the time was Ahab. And he married a Sidonian princess, that's a Phoenician princess named Jezebel. Now, since she was a Sidonian princess, what was the religion of Phoenicia? Baal worship. And because she wore the pants in this marriage, she got Ahab to worship Baal and all the rest of Israel. And you know the famous account of how Elijah was mocking Baal and his prophets and eventually killed him. Now, the thing is, Ahab was not very popular because he was wicked, and so was his wife. So in 2 Chronicles 18:1, Ahab wanted to fight the king of Judah at the time, but he could only gather 7,000 men. Now, that king was Jehoshaphat. He had 1 million soldiers. So of course he realized, well, if I can only get 7,000 men to fight for me, might as well be friends. So they were, the northern and the southern kingdoms were cordial for a while. And so then, because of Israel's sins of worship in Baal, Elijah prophesied a drought on them. And because, now it says in 1 Kings 17 and 18 that even the Phoenician city-states, Tyre and Sidon, were affected by the drought. Well, why would they be affected by a drought? Well, because it was all one big empire. And when you read in secular historical sources, they group Phoenicia and Israel together. And they will acknowledge the history of Israel. So that you can see here that they were cursed the same way that Israel was. So then, because it's all one big kingdom, because Ahab wanted to kill Elijah, he fled to a suburb in Sidon. And then an aide of King Ahab finds Elijah and tells him in 1 Kings 18:10 that Ahab will search the ends of the earth for you. Now, he didn't say the ends of Israel, he said of the earth. So this just backs up everything I showed you. Oh, we'll get to that in a minute. Is that he said, I'll search the ends of the earth for you. Because as you saw, the Phoenicians and Israelites were sailing all over the world. They had colonies all over the place in Africa and Europe. So he would have searched anywhere for Elijah. Elijah was scared. Good reason. So then we go to this. Now, remember I showed you this earlier? This stele in Iowa. Now there's 3 ancient languages written here. And this backs up the history with Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah in 1 Kings. Now, these 3 languages, one is Paleo-Hebrew, the Phoenician language. One is Iberian Punic. They all use the same writing system that the Spanish colonies of Phoenicia used. And the other one is an Egyptian writing system. So remember all these kingdoms were in with each other? And it's hard to see the images, but the various images on this stele were involved with pagan worship, mainly Baal worship. There's somewhere in there's a calf and a human sacrifice. This was a monument to foreign gods. And this is something from Semitic people in the Middle East. These artifacts I showed you are not Indian artifacts. And so then you go to the next slide. Now this was found in northern Vermont, which is, well, I think you know what that is. That was involved in Baal worship. And then we found another Baal monument. So that proves the Phoenicians were in America because they're setting up these monuments to their gods while they're sending out the material from the mines and everywhere. So then you go to the next slide. Now, this is when the Israelites go into captivity. In 2 Chronicles 28, the 2 kingdoms fight a gruesome war with each other. And the Israelites captured 200,000 Jews, the tribe of Judah, and Yahweh commanded them through a prophet to release the Jewish captives. And surprisingly, they let them go. So you can see these tribes are going back and forth between the northern and southern kingdom, and they're all over the place. They're in Europe and Africa. We'll get to that later. So they really are scattered. What did Yahweh tell Abraham? Your descendants will be scattered to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. And it's innumerable. They can't be numbered. It's not 15 million people only out of 7 billion people in the world. That's absurd. Even the Bible tells you otherwise.
Amen. That's right.
And so, 2 Kings 15:29, the king of Assyria invades Israel, the northern kingdom, and captures its capital, Samaria. Now, this is another misconception. Assyria did not take the whole northern kingdom at once. It went back for it twice. This is the first time it just took the capital, Samaria, because Jerusalem was the capital of the kingdom of Judah, as you know. Now, Assyria does not take all of the Israelites captive at once, but just some of them. In 1 Chronicles 5:26, it tells you all of the tribe of Naphtali, all the tribes of Naphtali, Gad, and Reuben, half of the tribe of Manasseh, and some of Zebulun and Issachar went into captivity the first time. These are all the tribes that lived in Galilee and Gilead. And so then, after they were taken into captivity, these Israelites settled, I don't have a specific map for it, but that whole Mesopotamia area, the places had different names in the Bible, but they were settled in Halah, Habor, Haran, to the river Gozan.
You did?
Oh, thanks. I really looked that bad, huh?
That's from Mom. From Mom.
It's for your mom.
No,
I'll pay for
must be
it.
wet. And they were also carried to the cities of the Medes. We'll find out what this place is later. This was actually later occupied by the Persians. And so then, Assyria comes back to finish the job. Now, they searched the whole land. It tells you this in 2 Kings 17. They searched the whole northern kingdom. But there was only people in Samaria. Now, this is strange because they took the capital. They just went for the capital, took some people, came back, and then there's still more because they didn't take all of them. But everywhere else in the northern kingdom, there was no one to be found. And a 3-year siege, the Assyrians were fighting the Israelites in Samaria, the rest of them, for 3 years. And they couldn't find, the whole other place was a wasteland. It tells you in 2 Kings 17 that lions became real populous in the northern kingdom of Israel. And when you see wild beasts in an area, it's from a place being abandoned. Because when there's not many people there, they don't hunt all the animals, so there's more wild prey for the beasts. It was a wasteland just swarming with animals, because only Samaria was occupied. And while the Assyrians are fighting Samaria for 3 years, it was a wasteland to begin with, but the people that were there, they got out of there. So yes, all the Israelites were taken captive, but some escaped before taken captive. So you go to the next slide, please. Now, we're going to dive into this more soon. Some of the northern tribes fled and found refuge in those colonies of Phoenicia, in Spain and those other places, before the Assyrians took them captive. Now, after the captivities, they were scattered after that, but they were scattered before that. Others fled and migrated to other places besides the Phoenician colonies. Now, some of the northern tribes migrated through Armenia, which in the ancient age was called Ararat. And they migrated through Armenia to a kingdom called Arsarat, which is a kingdom in the region north of the Black Sea. Secular historians call this Tartary, but this is what biblical sources tell you the name of. So if you go to the next page. Now, I'm quoting an apocryphal book here. I'm not saying that this belongs in the Bible or not to debate that. However, this backs up a lot of what is in 2 Kings. And this gives us some insight that the secular sources back up. It says in 2 Esdras chapter 13 verses 40 through 45. These are the 10 tribes that in the days of King Hoshea were carried away from their own land into captivity, whom Shalmaneser, what I pronounce that dude's name, king of Assyria, made captives and carried beyond the river. But they formed this plan among themselves, so leave the heathen population and go to a more distant region, so that there perhaps they might keep their statutes, which they had not kept in their own country. And they went in by the narrow passages of the Euphrates River. For the Most High then did wonders for them. for he held back the sources of the river until they had passed over. But it was a long journey of 1.5 years to that country, called Arzarath. So this apocryphal book backs up what we're going to dive into, where some of the 10 tribes went. Now it says they were carried beyond the river. That's what it tells you here. That's the Euphrates River. I'll keep this place in mind because this is a key. This is absolute proof, what we'll see from other historians, including Jewish historians, that the other tribes were lost, scattered beyond that region. A Jewish historian named Eldad confirms this account in the second book of Esdras from his memoirs of the 10 tribes. Many of the people did not go into captivity, but evaded the calamity, going off with their flocks and turning nomads, and that the chief or prince whom they appointed could muster 120,000 horses and 100,000 foot. So, when you take the number of horses and the people on horses and the people on foot, and then you figure in there's some women and children, there was over 1 million northern tribe Israelites going across the Euphrates into this land called Arzarath, north of the Black Sea. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is, and we're going to get back to this map several times, we're going to explain this in detail. This is where all of the northern 10 tribes, and even some of the southern kingdom, they were all intermingled with each other, were scattered. But we're not going to get into Judah because there's no contention who they are. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to figure out who the other suckers are. And so that's, so you can just go to the next slide when everyone's done looking at it.
Okay.
That's fine.
Let me go back.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty big map, and this is just a condensed map. It'd be an eyesore to read otherwise. But if you remember the names of these places, we're going to tie this all in. Oh, thanks. Now this is going to look bad on the internet.
It'll look good.
All this sweat.
Oh, we got old.
It's not on you most of the time, it's on the screen.
No, well, yeah, maybe I have a fever, I don't know. But anyway, so...
It has no authority. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel pretty good, actually. So then, when everyone's done looking at this map, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so... now, a lot of people, two-housers, they elevate Judah as if they did nothing wrong. Like that is the superior house, and that they didn't sin or fall away from Yahweh, but the scriptures tell us otherwise. Jeremiah chapter 3 verses 6 through 12 says,
It was good.
Yahweh said also unto me in the days of Josiah the king, Hast thou seen that which backsliding Israel hath done? She has gone up upon every high mountain and under every green tree, and there hath played the harlot. And I said, after she had done all these things, Turn thou unto me. But she returned not. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And I saw, when for all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away, and given her a bill of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also. And yet for all this her treacherous sister Judah hath not turned unto me in her whole heart, but feignedly, saith Yahweh. And Yahweh said unto me, the backsliding Israel hath justified herself more than treacherous Judah. Well, that's why Israel went into captivity first, but Judah ain't getting away with nothing. They're no better than the rest of us. Yeah, sorry if someone could please fill this up for me. Water. Thanks, brother. So you can go to the next slide now. Go back. Now in Jeremiah 51:5, despite Israel's sins, or Judah's for that matter, but we're focusing on Israel, the northern 10 tribes, they're still going to be blessed. And historical events you probably never heard of. Jeremiah 51:5 says, For Israel hath not been forsaken, nor Judah of his Elohim, of Yahweh of hosts. Through their land was filled with sin against the Holy One of Israel. So despite their sins, they were not forsaken. And so, you go to the next slide. Now, some of the tribes migrated into the empire of Carthage. And the red areas is where Carthage is. Those Spanish territories we talked about in northern Africa. Now, since the Greeks and Romans write mainstream history, they tell you, oh, the Carthage, they're all barbarians, they're uncivilized, and they're pretty much put down in history. Oh, thank you. But, citing older historical sources and other Greek and Roman historians at the time around Carthage who gave them a better rep, we're going to see what these people are all about. So you can go to the next slide. And so, a large exodus of Israelites sailed along the North African coast and founded the Hebrew colony of Kiryat Hadashah. Now, as you know, any Hebrew or Semitic terms the Greeks and Romans fudge up, and we can't tell who these people are. The Greeks called it Carchedon. Then the Romans, as they conquered the Greeks, later renamed it Carthage. So this is what everyone knows the Carthage Empire as. But when we find out what their original name is, it's strikingly similar to the name a lot of Israelite cities were given in the Bible, such as Kiryathaim, or Kiryat Arba, or it's weird sounding names. You get the picture. These are mentioned in Numbers, Joshua, and 1 Samuel in several places. These are eerily similar to the original name of Carthage, Kiryat Hadashah. So these people clearly have Hebrew origin. Now, what I forgot to mention is that because the Israelites and the Phoenicians were all intermingled with each other, they adopted some of their customs. And that is why the Israelites turned to Baal worship. And since the northern kingdom was closer with Phoenicia, their language became more similar to the Phoenicians, and they lost a lot of their customs. Their original Hebrew customs, but they kept some of them that we're going to see in these lost empires that I'm going to discuss. So, the chief magistrates of Carthage were called Sophetim. You know what that means? It's Hebrew word for judges. That's what they called themselves. Wow. Their priests were called the Kohanim, and the high Carthage priest was the Rav Kohanim. Wow. And even secular records will tell you this. People just don't see the connection.
That's good. That's good.
Now, before the Carthage Empire was founded, some people living in that area of North Africa were called the Masasili and the Pharusians. Now, what does that look like to you? Manasseh and Phares, one of the lines of Judah, one of the royal lines of Judah. It actually is the royal line that the Messiah comes from. And we're going to see a lot more terms like this later on. Now, the god that the Carthaginians worshipped, they called El. That's what they called him early on. Now, when you do a typical Google search on the word El, Wikipedia tells you that's the name of Baal. That's not true, because anyone, as we all know from knowing a bit of Hebrew, El, or Elohim, that is a title of the God of Israel. It's not the name of Baal. However, the people of Carthage did worship Baal in their later years, not early on. So this is where the confusion comes in. Oh, can you go back? Go back, please. Thanks. This is where the confusion comes in, thinking that El is Baal. You know why they eventually called Baal El? Because before they started worshiping Baal, they knew who their original God was. Well, maybe they didn't, but they kept some of the memory. these people have Hebrew origins. These are not a pagan lineage. It was just with all the intermixing with Phoenician and the migrations, you can see they kept some of the customs and language, and Carthage used that same Semitic Paleo-Hebrew type alphabet too. People don't see the connection. And not only did they call their god El, but the people of Carthage, their instructions of animal sacrifices, libations, and other priestly rites bared a significant resemblance to the book of Leviticus that the Levites did. Now, in the later years, Carthage did become Baal worshippers. They call their god El Baal Haman. You go to the next slide, please. But this was only during the Second and Third Punic Wars. Before this, the Carthaginians had some pretty biblical principles. They forbade graven images, and they did make small stone monuments, but they didn't put any pictures on them. So they were kind of in compliance with that law, I guess. And they also built altars very similar to the altar specifications described in Exodus 24 and 20:25. The historians Gilbert and Colette Charles Picard wrote that the early people of Carthage practiced monogamy and encouraged strong structure and values of the family. And they found skeletons of married couples buried together in tombs. And no harems or eunuchs were found. Women of the aristocracy of Carthage received an extensive formal education and were able to flex some influence on the politics of Carthage. So the Roman history tells us these people are uncivilized barbarians. Now, you'll find out why they smear these people, and we'll get to that later. But you can see the women were educated, they were in politics, they encouraged strong marriage, they rejected a lot of pagan principles. At first, these were not uncivilized barbarians.
Amen.
That's just what mainstream history tells us. And after the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, all encyclopedias and history books removed all this information. It's true. But why did history become more secularized? Yes?
So there was an edition that had this instead of the changes that we saw.
Well, the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica and the ones before it did have some of this information, yes, and even mentioned the Bible.
Wow.
But as time passed on with the influence of Darwin, any historical clues to validate the scriptures, just got lost. Because actually in public schools in the early 1900s and late 1800s, they taught the Bible in public schools. They don't anymore. Now, after the Second and Third Punic Wars, the people of Carthage did eventually lose their Hebrew customs and degenerate into human sacrifice and rituals that mirrored Baal worship. Now, the Carthaginians called the place where dead bodies of humans, for human sacrifice, particularly infants, they called the places the dead bodies are placed a Tophet. This is the same word that is used 5 times in Jeremiah 19 in a discourse against human sacrifice. So even when they flew off the deep end and became pagans, they were still using these Hebrew terms. So if you go to the next page, please. Now, the Encyclopedia Judaica, well, this is funny. They acknowledge the Carthaginians, but they don't call them Carthage. They just call them Africans. Oh, those darn Africans. It's the Encyclopedia Judaica says the Africans disputed with the Jews. But of course, what it really should say is the Carthaginians disputed against the Israelites, because some of the Israelites were in with the house of Judah, over the former territory of Israel. Now, why did Carthage decide to just pick a beef with the kingdom of Judah, the people that were still there before they were taken captive? Did they have some memory of where they came from and they kind of wanted that place back? Why would they just attack for no reason? Oh, they were just feeling ornery and wanted to go to the Middle East and pick a fight. Yeah, must explain it. Now, refugees from the city of Tyre, a Phoenician city, when Tyre fell to Nebuchadnezzar, those refugees actually went to Carthage. So they found some of their kinsmen again. Remember that place in Spain called the Gades? Well, Carthage became allied with the Gades. When you saw that map, the Carthage Empire included those areas of Spain. They helped the Gades colony in a local war against the Romans. And in a treaty dated 348 BC, the Carthaginians forbade the Romans even to trade with those western Mediterranean areas. Those areas the Phoenicians traded in, the Carthaginians took over. That's where they traded, and they wanted the Romans out of that area as they were harassing the colony of Gades. And so they made a treaty with the Romans. They said, you can trade here, but only if you repair our ships. They were extorting them. And there was, I don't have a picture, but there was a naval phalanx called the Pillar of Hercules. And this was a Greek and Roman, super navy formation. But the Carthaginians, now remember the Phoenicians, they had 1,000-ton ships. And since the people of Carthage come from that same area, they had these same ships. And so they had superior technology of the Romans, and were preventing them from sailing into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, secular history says, that area of the Middle East, like Israel and Palestine, Phoenicia, says those were crude, uncivilized people with poor technology. The Romans and Greeks, they have all the superior stuff. They got it going on. But we see that the Semitic people had superior technology to the Greeks and Romans, more knowledge. And so if you go to the next slide, please. Now this is called the Punic cart. It's not a good photo, but this is the only original model of this cart that the people of Carthage invented that I could find. You want me to hold on, or? No, I'm good, thanks. Thank you. Now, this was a threshing board, an agricultural device that the people of Carthage, well, they're credited with inventing this, but the origin goes back way older than that. Their ancestor, Jacob, was an agricultural worker, and that's where they got that trait from. And the Egyptians used this threshing board too, because they knew they were all tied in with the Phoenicians and the people of Carthage. Remember, they were all one big empire. Where do you think they got it from? So, and then you go to the next slide. Now, the next people we're talking about are the Scythians. Once again, the Romans say these are uncivilized barbarians, and crude and don't know anything. But we're going to prove them wrong too. And so, now notice the name, when everyone's done looking at this map, Mike, he can go to the next slide. And, but notice the names of these places, and we're going to come back to this. Keep these in mind. The red area is, yeah, this is the red area. This is where the Scythians migrated and various places they conquered. So when everyone's ready, you can go to the next slide. Now, typically the Scythians are just thought of barbarians from Asia. They're given a bad rep too, just like the people of Carthage. And so, Flavius Josephus, a lot of people know who he is. He was a Jewish military commander, Pharisee, and historian of the 1st century AD. He wrote a lot about Yeshua, the Messiah. And he wrote about these people too, the Scythians, the people of Carthage, the Parthians, and I'm going to be quoting him a lot. He wrote, "Wherefore there are but 2 tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes are beyond Euphrates till now, and are an immense multitude, and not to be estimated by numbers." Now here we have a Jewish historian and a Pharisee, no less, and those guys, they didn't like anyone that wasn't an Israelite or Semitic. They were very bigoted. But here we have Josephus acknowledging that all of the tribes went beyond the Euphrates. He acknowledges they were lost. Yeah, right from the mouth of Josephus. Now, in Genesis 21:12, there's a prophecy given here. It says, "Through Isaac shall your descendants be named." A lot of the descendants of Israelites will bear the name of Isaac. Now, in 674 BC, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon was confronted by an alliance of Median, that was Medes, that area we talked about earlier, and newly arrived Sumerian. It's spelled differently at the C. That's really Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. These three people teamed up and had a beef with the Assyrians. Now, all these historical records, all these people are fighting each other, and they don't see the connection why. And like you said, Greek and Roman history sources fudge the names up, but the Sumerians and the people in this area have a bone to pick with this Assyrian king. And we can pretty much guess why, because they know what the Assyrians did to them, and when they were scattered, they're coming back for some payback. So, the Sumeri were one of the first settlers in the Black Sea region of Scythia. Now, the Romans and the Greeks called them Scythians, but they were known by a different name. Even the Romans and Greeks knew them by other names. There were two types of Scythians. One sub-tribe of Scythians were called the Saka, or the Saki. Now, Genesis 21:12 says, "Through Isaac shall your descendants be named." Now, you're going to see a lot of Scythian cities. Now, doesn't Saki, that does kind of sound like Isaac, doesn't it? And we're going to tie in that these people are Hebrews too. Now, the other Scythians were called Turanians, and they came from Tiras, one of the sons of Japheth. That's one of Noah's sons. The Shem is the Semitic people, and Japheth, that's where Persians and other nations come from. So there's some debate whether the Turanians are Semitic or not. But the Saki Scythians definitely are, but history confuses them. They say, well, all these people are just a bunch of barbarians that came from Asia, and they don't really mean much of anything. But you don't realize the historical significance of these people. And they're just kind of swept under the rug, but we're going to find out more about them. Now, a capital of the Scythian Empire was named Sakis. You can go to the next slide. Again, bearing the name of Isaac. Now, Ptolemy referred to the Scythians as the Saxons. It's going to give us another clue on how to trace the lineage of some of these people. See, they're all known by different names depending on who you ask and what language they're translated into. The Assyrian records recall the rebellion of a people. Remember those three people that were mad at the Assyrians and picking a bone with them? The Assyrian historical records recall these people, known as the Asaksa. That's what the Assyrians call them. But you know who they call themselves, these Scythians? Beth Isaac, or the house of Isaac. That's what they originally called themselves. And there's a reason they want to fight these Assyrians. Now, there's some Hebrew customs with the Scythians as well. They forbade idolatry. They were strictly against it. King Saulius of Scythia executed his own brother for participating in the rites of a Greek goddess and wearing images of the Greek deity Bacchus. King Skiles, he led a secret life of idolatry. And when his people found out, they overthrew him and replaced him with his brother Octomasides. And then he beheaded his brother Skiles, the idol worshipper, in Thrace, which is a modern Balkan region. Skiles tried to get away with the Balkans. His brother chopped his head off. These people were so against idolatry, they killed people for it. And what's the penalty for idolatry in the Torah is death. Where did they get this from? And they can just pull it out of thin air. And the Scythians also avoided swine flesh and sacrificing pigs. If you go to the next slide. Now, this is an artist's rendering and stone carving of what the Scythians looked like. Now, this cap they're wearing, you'll see this later on too with some other people. But this, does this remind you of anything?
Yeah.
Yes, a high priest mitre. Now, they couldn't have just gotten that from nowhere. So when everyone's done looking at it, you can go to the next slide. Now, in 624 BC, the Scythians launched massive invasions to the south, and they occupied Asia Minor, Syria, Media, that's Medes, Palestine, and much of Assyria. They even went as far south as Egypt, but spared that country when the Egyptians offered to pay them tribute money. See you next time. I'll send you guys the video. Have a blessed evening. And so, where was I? Oh yes, the Egyptians paid off the Scythians and not touch them. They were quaking in their boots as they conquered all these other areas in Asia and the Middle East. Now, the headquarters of the Assyrian army, Kalat, was burned by the Scythians. Again, they're going after the Assyrians. They got a vendetta with them. Now, the northern Scythians sacked most of Assyria, but the eastern Scythians displaced the kingdom of Elite. Now, these various Scythians are known by different tribal names, which we'll get to later. But the northern Scythians held these regions of Western Asia and the Middle East for only 28 years, according to Herodotus. They didn't rule those places for long. However, when they conquered Palestine, because the Assyrians were situated there at the time, they ignored the Jewish capital of Jerusalem. They ravaged the entire area of Palestine, but left Jerusalem alone. Why is that? Could it be that they remembered who their kinsmen were? They didn't just ignore Jerusalem for no apparent reason. We're going to prove that they ignored that for a specific reason. Now, one city in Palestine called Beth Shan was actually renamed Scythopolis in honor of the Scythians who liberated Palestine for 28 years from the Assyrians. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, at the time the Scythians were conquering Palestine, these areas, the king of Judah was Josiah. And in 2 Kings 22:3, he issued a decree to restore the temple of Yahweh in the 18th year of his reign. A copy of the law, or the Torah, was found in his temple restoration project. Among King Josiah's reforms were the destruction of false gods' images, forbidding human sacrifices, tearing down brothels for temple prostitutes, slaying pagan priests, and destroying the altars for pagan gods that Solomon built for his pagan wives. And Josiah also restored Passover in the days of unleavened bread. We read this in 2 Chronicles 35:17 through 19. So Josiah was trying to bring them back to worship in the God of Israel. Now, to go to the next slide, we're going to look at some verses. 2 Chronicles 34:3 through 9. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was yet young, he began to seek after the Elohim of David his father. And in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem from the high places, and the groves, and the carved images, and the molten images. And they break down the altars of Baalim in his presence, and the images that were on high above him he cut down in the groves, and the carved images, and the molten images he brake in pieces, and made dust of them, and he strode it upon the graves of them that had sacrificed unto them. And he burnt the bones of the priests upon the altars, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And so did he in the cities of Manasseh, and Ephraim, and Simeon, even unto Naphtali. Well, wait a second. The northern kingdom's gone. Only the southern kingdom's left in this account in the Bible, but he's mentioning that these other tribes are here in the southern kingdom. How did they get back here? That's because the Scythians, when they liberated Palestine, Josiah knew who they were. See, the Bible doesn't call them Scythians, just the Greeks and the Romans do. But he knew who his people were. So if you go to the next slide. And, And then we go to verse 9. And when they came to Hilkiah the high priest, they delivered the money that was brought into the house of Elohim, which the Levites that kept the doors had gathered of the hands of Manasseh and Ephraim, and of all the remnant of Israel, and of all Judah and Benjamin. And they returned to Jerusalem. It says these people came back. These were what the secular historians call the Scythians. As they were liberated Palestine, they stopped by to partake of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread with Josiah and the kingdom of Judah. And they remembered where they came from. So if you go to the next slide. And then it says, and the children of Israel that were present kept the Passover at that time and the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days. And there was no Passover like to that kept in Israel from the days of Samuel the prophet. Neither did all the kings of Israel keep such a Passover as Josiah kept, and the priests and the Levites and all Judah and Israel that were present, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Oh, it's all right. Let's say so. Even though the northern kingdom's gone, this account in Chronicles, they're saying the children of Israel. Bless you. So what secular historical accounts as the times and events match call by other names, the Bible just calls them the Israelites. You can go to the next slide. But the Scythians did not stay in Palestine, because the Assyrians brought in foreigners. And as you see it's in 2 Kings 17, even when they drove them out, they decided to come back. And Judah quickly forsook the laws of Yahweh after Josiah's reform. So they saw no reason to stay there in the land of Palestine. So the Scythians departed from those regions in the general area of Mesopotamia, and that's because they were nomadic people. They started migrating to other areas. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, good. Should you refill that, please? Thanks. So then, the Scythians, because they were nomads and traveling all around, you know, they, if anyone's getting tired, I can finish this some other time.
Go ahead.
No,
You're on the road, man.
we're tired, but we're listening.
Oh, because
We want to listen.
this could go on for a while.
Keep going.
Go ahead.
We love it. Keep going.
Oh, thanks. So anyway, huh? Oh yeah. So the Scythians were in the area of Medes, and a lot of the Israelites were already. We learned that. And the Persians were in that area. And they launched a massive military expedition against the Scythians in the Black Sea area. The Persians wanted to make the Scythians subjects. They had another thing coming though. King Darius of the Persians commanded an army of 700,000 men and passed through modern Turkey, crossed the Bosphorus on a bridge of ships, and attacked the Scythian homeland north of the Black Sea by marching what is today modern-day Bulgaria and Romania, the Baltic areas. The Scythian custom of living in portable homes served them well, because they were able to remain ahead of the Persians. Oh, thank you. And the Scythians were quite clever. They adopted a scorch and burn policy, ruining it. They just burned everything in their path so the Persians couldn't find them. So they knew where Darius and the Persians were, though. They were keeping track of them. So the Scythians sent a little present to Darius. It was a bird, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. Now, for some reason, this scared the Persians. There's several accounts as to why. There's some theories speculate there was a note in there. And one theory was that, the note said, "You better fly away like a bird, run away like a mouse or jump like a frog, or we will shoot you with our arrows. And so then the Scythians persuaded the Greeks to destroy a fleet of Persian ships along the Danube River. Well, I kind of spoiled that.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if that picked up, but so then the Persians fled. They just gave up. They knew they couldn't contend with these guys. So in 530 BC, King Cyrus, another Persian king, invaded the eastern Scythians, who were then located east of the Caspian Sea. The tribes they attacked were the Masagate and the Dahe. Now Masagate, that actually has roots in the tribe of Manasseh. So then we go to the next page.
Who is Dahe? Dan?
Yeah, that because you see the Danube River. We'll get to that when we get to Dan. But yeah, there's, and so Queen Tomiris of the Masagati, and Tomiris is basically a Hellenized variation. That's what they call her in secular records, but that was actually a variation of Tamar, Hebrew princess. She was royalty. And she sent Cyrus a message and said, "King of the Medes, cease to be so eager to do what you are doing. Rule over your own people and endure to look upon us govern in ours." She wanted a live and let live attitude, but Cyrus wouldn't cease. So she replied once again, "If you do not so, I swear by the sun, the Lord of the Masagati, that for all your insatiability of blood, I will give you your fill of it." Now, even though they maintained some Hebrew customs, you notice Queen Tomiris said, "I swear by the sun." Well, that's, as you know, the Israelites were mingled with the Phoenicians, the Baal worshippers, so they had kind of a mishmash of everything. Now, the Romans, they say, "Oh, the Scythians, they're uncivilized barbarians too." Well, here we have the Persian king unwarrantedly acting aggressive towards the Masagati, and they just want peace. These don't sound like barbarians. They have very clever battle tactics, and again, these people get a bad rep too, and you're going to find out why the Romans have it in for all these people, as they're all related. We're going to get to that real soon. So go to the next slide. Now this is what makes the Romans hot and mad, is the Romans write history. Now this is the empire of Parthia, which is very underrated in today's mainstream historical records, that these people had the Romans by the short hairs.
Ooh.
So when everyone's done looking at this map, you can go to the next slide.
Are we good?
No. Some of the text is hard to read, but so, now Josephus writes extensively about these people, about Parthia as well. Now, in Josephus's book, The War of the Jews, he originally wrote this book in a Semitic language, so the surrounding nations beyond the Euphrates, remember he mentioned that, so could understand his writings. Now, since he was a Pharisee, he wanted nothing to do with people that weren't his Semitic kinsmen. But he wrote this book specifically for these surrounding nations, the Parthians, the Scythians. Now, most modern versions of that book are translated from his Greek translation, but he didn't want to write it in Greek. Josephus wrote, "I have proposed for the sake of such that live under the government of the Romans to translate these books into the Greek tongue, which I formerly composed in the language of our own country and sent it to the upper barbarians." And in a footnote of Josephus's War of the Jews book, the footnote for barbarians identifies them as Parthians, which is what mainstream history calls them. Now, was he taking a jab at the Romans? Like, oh yeah, they're barbarians like you say they are. But Josephus regarded the Parthians were familiar with Hebrew, or Syro-Chaldaic. So he knew these people had the same common origins as him. Now, the people of Parthia were subject to the Persians for a while. The Persians refer to them as Partha, and they eventually revolted. Now, you're going to notice this pattern. Many times in history, the ousted Parthian kings sought refuge with the Saki tribes of the Scythians, or when they were out of soldiers, they'd get reinforcements from the Sakis. And why would they bother going to these people if they had no connection? Now, the alphabet in use in Persia, and as you know from the books of Esther, the book of Esther, that a lot of Israelites, particularly Judah, was in captivity in Persia. And so they did use a common alphabet. The alphabet used in Persia at that time was based upon Aramaic, at least from the time of the Arsacid dynasty. We're going to find out who the Arsacid dynasty is. Now, Acts chapter 2, when Pentecost, or Shavuot, whatever you call it's mentioned, it mentions the Parthians were there. Now, the average reader, they're reading this and think, well, those are just people from the Asian areas coming to get converted or something. But now, the New Testament translated from Greek calls them Parthians, but they were known by other names too. So to the average person, this glances over on who these Parthians really are and why they're coming to Pentecost. So a prominent city of Parthia was named Asak. Another one, Samarian, and its chief city was called Gaza. Once again, there's a lot of similarities to their old culture. And if you go to the next slide, in Jeremiah 33:17, there's a prophecy. It says, "For thus saith Yahweh, David shall never," well, some translations say, "shall never lack a man to sit upon the throne of the house of Israel." So here it says there will always be an heir for David. And if you go to the next slide, now, a lot of the Parthian royalty, some of the names of the kings were called Phraides, Phraordes, or Phratakes. These are just Hellenized forms of Phares, which is the royal line of Judah. And we're going to see the connections. They were the names for some of the Parthian kings and some of the kings of Iberia. Remember the Iberian Peninsula and Iberia? Were named Pharismanes. Again, the kings of these nations have eerily similar names rooted in Pharis, just in Hellenized Greek and Latin forms. At least that's what the history books calls them. So, Jehoiakim, one of the last kings of Judah, was carried captive to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. We find about this in 2 Kings 25. 37 years later, I think he was found in a dungeon or something, I forget. But he became a vassal king of later Babylonian kings. So here we see the royal line of Judah. They often become subordinate kings of other higher kings. And we're going to see this pattern with the Parthians too. 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verses 16 through 24 shows that the royal family of Judah did not die out, but produced many descendants during the generations after the fall of Jerusalem. Now, what's curious about the Parthians is that they always insisted that the blood members of the Arsacid family were the rulers. I'm good, thanks. They only let blood members of this royal lineage be the rulers in the Parthian Empire. We're going to find out what this Arsacid dynasty is, and you go to the next page. The historian Diodorus noted that the Parthians passed from the dominion of the Assyrians to that of the Medes, to a similar position under the Persians. George Rawlinson also noted that other earlier historians regard the Parthians as exiles. It's interesting, they're calling these people exiles. What are they exiled from? The Parthians revolted and placed themselves under Scythian protection. You're going to see they do this a lot. After the fall of the Persian Empire, Parthian territory fell into the hands of the Greeks under Alexander the Great. After Alexander the Great died, the division of his kingdom was ruled by the, I don't know how to pronounce this, like Seleucid Greeks. Now in 256 BC, the provinces of Parthia and Bactria, which is ruled by the Greeks, revolted against these said Greeks. Arsaces is where the Arsacid dynasty comes from. The first king of the Parthians was a chieftain of a Scythian tribe, the Dahanites. Although some contend he was a Bactrian, but this is all in the same geographical area. However, the first king of the Parthians was actually initially a Scythian, and they kept going back for Scythian protection and had an odd relationship with them because they clearly have a common root. Now, in Numbers 26, verses 35 through 36, the sub-tribes or clans of Ephraim were named the Bachrites, the Aaronites, and the Tahanites. Now, when you see this word Dahanites, now typically when we see these names we do think of Dan, and we'll get into that later, but in this case, because of the linkage to the tribe, the clans of Manasseh mentioned in Numbers, the Dahanites are actually the Tahanites, so that's not Dan, it's more or less a root in a Ephraimite tribe. Now, notice that name, Aaronites. Now, Iran was an Ephraimite clan, like I mentioned. Iran is derived from Aaron. And Pahlavi was an old Persian tongue and had strong Semitic traits. We already established the Persians used an Aramaic alphabet. They did take, did have a lot of the Israelites captive, particularly Judah, the book of Esther. So Pahlavi sounds a lot like Levi, and Iran comes from Iran. Now the Persians, they are the Persians. I'm not saying that they're the people in Iran today are Hebrews. However, the reason why some of the names bear the same resemblance is because of who lived there at the time. So this is an exception to the rule. So anyway, you just go to the next slide. Oh, you did, okay. Now Parthia rose to power while the empire of Carthage began to die out during the Second and Third Punic Wars. When Arsaces died, the first king of Parthia, he was replaced by his brother Tiridates. And Tiridates named a mountain fortress in Parthia Dara. In the 1 Chronicles 2:6, that was the name of a patriarch from the tribe of Judah. The Seleucids, those Greeks, emerged 40 years later, and they temporarily recaptured the Parthian capital city, but after the war ended, they signed a peace treaty and relinquished it. Now, the next monarch, Mithridates I, by the time of his death, had placed Bactria, Media, Babylonia, Persia, and other territories under Parthian rule. That map you saw, that's why the Parthian Empire was so big. Now, in 129 BC, the Seleucids attacked